Hey everybody, welcome to A Court of Books and Baddies monthly spoiler chat. I'm Selena Samuela.
And I'm Krista.
So this month we are covering the second book in a duology by Carissa Broadbent. The first book was The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and the second book was Ashes and the Star-Cursed King. So we're going over Ashes.
Yes, so I know it's a little awkward to probably be covering book two. If you haven't obviously read book one, nice to meet you. Thanks for joining. Please play later because we're going to be talking all about book one and book two and the first duology in this overall series, which we're not going to be reading the entire series, but if you do plan to continue on, there are more books in this series. But this one was the Nightborn duet. So we have Rain and Araya as our main characters in this set, and I absolutely love both of them. Rain just, I don't know what more you can ask for in your male love interest. And Araya was just such a badass. Like she just, I don't know. I admired them
Badass, and
so
she's also
much.
a complex character, which I think is always interesting,
Yeah.
right? She's not simple, and I think her decision making makes a lot of sense. She's strategic, she's got conviction, she stands on her business, and yeah, I think she's a really worthy lead female character.
Yes. And Carissa Broadbent does that so well in developing very complex characters, but makes them very relatable in their decisions. Like anything that they do, it's almost like you can understand why they do it, even if you disagree with, knowing ahead of time that that's probably not the best move, or, they're going based off emotion instead of maybe strategically thinking ahead of things. But she just makes you understand what it is that they're doing or why they're doing it. And the series in particular was really good at going back into their backstories as well. Like we had a lot of those interludes between each section of the book that kind of explained their history in a way that I feel like allows us to understand them on an even deeper level than what we just see from where they're at in the story when we meet them. So I particularly loved knowing and understanding the character because then I don't necessarily have to relate, but I can understand.
Yeah, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but I think, what Carissa Broadbent does so well with all of her characters is, when we're talking about decision making, their decision making, like you said, you may not agree with it, but you may not agree with it from a personal perspective, right? You're like, well, if I was in that person's shoes, but she makes it make sense for the character, and it's not petulant. She doesn't try to make it make sense for the sake of a plot. She makes it make sense for that specific character, which I think makes them so much more enjoyable and likable. So, and I think, we've both read the
War of Lost
War of
Hearts.
Lost Heart
Yes, her
series.
trilogy.
We've continued on with the Nyaxia books as well, and this rings true for all of her characters in all of her books. I
Yes, and she like not only does romance so well and their relationship in that aspect, but individually they're developed very well. And then on top of that, the supporting cast of characters, they're always people that you're rooting for, or they're either, people you despise. Like whatever emotion she's evoking, she gets that from the reader. And I appreciate that so much in just the skills that she has in her writing. So I definitely plan to continue. I know you've read the next series, which kind of follows Misha into Fallen and Songbird. Fallen coming out in August. So I plan to continue. I definitely love her writing style and
Right. A
I'm excited for
duology for
more.
each house, right? So she just did the Nightborn. Now then the next duology, Misha story is the Shadowborn, and then she's going to do a duology based on the Bloodborne, which I'm really excited about because they seem so interesting to me, and their backstory is really seemingly tragic, and
Yes, they're cursed. They're
they're
cursed by,
cursed.
their god. So
And
we
I
have a
think
lot to.
Septimus seems like a really interesting character, and I'm excited to
Mhm.
find out more about him.
Based on her drafting right now, she seems to be having a lot of fun writing it. And so I'm definitely excited to see where she takes this series. Speaking of Septimus, like, I don't know how she could have just done any better writing him. He was so kind of skeevy and sly, and like, you just kind of got the ick. I think at one point, Rain was like, I called him like an odor that you just can't get rid of. Something like the fucker just kept coming back. Like, because he'd be like around the corner.
He would
Araya
pop
would
up out
talk
of
about
nowhere.
like, yeah, like, oh, I swear you can't even hear his footsteps. He would just suddenly be there. You would just, speaking of odor, you would just smell like the cigarello and you'd be like, oh. Here he is.
I have a feeling that we're going to end up loving him the way that we ended up loving Asar in Songbird, the same kind of I have that feeling. I feel like we're going to
Yeah,
understand where
she's
he's
so
coming
good at doing that. Like it always blows my mind how much she can have you disguise somebody and then open them up and give them like a reason for how they,
Yeah, their
are, or
motivation. You
their
start to
behavior,
understand their
and then just
motivations.
redeem them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so she's just, I wouldn't be surprised either. I definitely didn't trust him. I think we saw at the end of Serpent, when they were doing their final trial, Angelica, who was Bloodborne, was essentially trying to kill them. And we see this subtle nod from Rain, who looks up into the crowd and kind of like does a nod. And all of a sudden, Angelica kind of pulls back and stops trying to kill them and ultimately loses. But we find out later that Septimus is like making a deal with him to be like, listen, you're going to let the Bloodborne be an ally in your cause. And if that's the case, we'll help you get to that. And so all these little things that were tied in that you didn't really remember or notice from book one, when they reappear in book two and they just click and everything kind of makes sense. You're just like,
Yeah.
damn, like
And I have a feeling we're going to
so well
understand
done.
Septimus's motivations a little bit more. I mean, you can already sense that that's what's happening, right? Because we get a little bit of their backstory. So I'm sure we'll learn more, and who knows, maybe we'll end up being Team Septimus in the future. But
Yeah, I mean, clearly he was the one that got away at the end. So we definitely know that there's a reason why that was. But their battle throughout this book to get to that point definitely was a journey. I know the beginning of this book was a little slower than all the action we had from the Kajari. It was more emotionally heavy and driven. We saw Araya, who, is typically this fighter and very strong-willed, just kind of give up. She was almost a prisoner in her own home, crying in bed, not showing kind of any of her usual self.
which is also
And we
so
see that
relatable
she's
too,
suffering.
right? Like that's more of that like real relatable character. Like if your heart was broken that way, the way hers was broken, you probably would also be bawling in bed for a while and just be depressed and, forlorn and
I mean, her whole world was shattered. She lost her father. She was betrayed by her lover. Everything she's ever known seems to have been a lie or, a portion of the truth. And she really struggles to come to terms with that. And honestly, I really appreciated that it wasn't a quick turnaround
same.
for that, because that was a lot to process, a lot to figure out where she stands in all of it. So I thought that was, accurate. It wasn't brushed over. And I really appreciated the complexity of her relationship with Vincent and the fact that she still kept hearing him in her mind throughout this book, but also how that voice changed throughout the book. We start to hear less of him, or we start to hear him and she starts to question the truth in what she's hearing. Like she's starting to get to realize that he wasn't everything he was saying he was. And if you notice too, he's the one who deemed her the little serpent, but Rain starts calling her a viper. And I really loved that like turn of events in like the way that he sees her as you're no longer this little serpent. Like you're a viper, you're something to contend with. So I just love that so much about how much Rain saw her for who she was and really helped bring that back with his "there she is" comments.
There she is. I think, what else is so stupendous about that character is that despite being down on the ground, feeling decidedly lost for a while and almost like desperate, she still chooses to find a way. She gets back up. She's so strong.
We see her trying to undo those locks on her door. And then, she notices when they don't lock them all and ultimately is like, screw this, I'm getting out of here. Like, I'm going to go, this is my castle. Like, I know this home better than anyone else here.
And
And then
also,
she finds that bowl and then she starts to like, she starts to make some moves. Like, she's like, I'm not sitting around anymore. And, she kind of plans a whole attack.
which is so cool because it's like she's sorting through all of this, and you were just touching on how we're hearing about her inner monologues and dialogues with her father and how she's kind of unraveling everything and kind of coming to terms with like, okay, what's real, what's not real, while she's also handling business, which I think
Yeah, I
is
mean, she's a queen now. Like, and I don't like, she wasn't expecting that. She didn't really want that, but now she's got a choice to make, right? Like, she's the rightful heir to the throne that her father had. And I do like that it wasn't an easy decision to just be like, oh, well, I'll sit back and let Rain have this one. It was like, no, I'm going to fight for this one too.
Yeah, Batty.
And I thought the whole, even Jessamine, right? How much did you despise her in book one after she was like,
Hated her.
anytime we saw her,
Hated
yeah.
her. And now,
And then, suddenly she's like, Your Highness, and like, I'm loyal to you and I will follow you. And then we even see towards the end when she does make that decision of like, I'm gonna rule as an equal and we're gonna end this war between the clans. And she was kind of like, I'm not here for that, but you know what? What do you need me to do?
right, right.
So I don't know, appreciated it too.
Same. So, one of the notes that I got about this book from our Acrobaddies is that it read kind of slow and that like not that much happened until basically the very end. How do you feel about that? Do you agree or did you enjoy the pace? What was your vibe?
So I think with this one, it's difficult because we had essentially a tournament in the first book. So it was like we always knew there was another impending battle. We always knew who was kind of our enemy and who was our ally. And here things were much more complicated in who we can trust. The Bloodborne are involved, the Shadowborn show up. Like there's so much happening, and there was a lot of past and history that came into it as well to try to understand like who's got this source of power, and Septim is after this god blood, and we're trying to uncover secrets. And so I think that kind of took the pacing back a little bit, as far as like there's now a lot more information. There was a lot more dialogue. Like there was this kind of nobility of like, we're hosting this ball and we need to court the people. So I definitely think it was much slower. And I think if you didn't necessarily care enough about the characters, you might not necessarily care about the outcome. So I think that can change how invested you are, right? Like in doing that slower pace until we kind of get to the battles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think things didn't even get super crazy. Like the armory was kind of a small scene where you kind of had that option where she almost gets that chance to kill him again, and we realize she doesn't take it. He finds out that she's basically decided to go up against him in that scene. But then we don't really get much. Then we get Eveline. It's like crazy. And that was kind of gnarly. That's when I think things kind of start to pick up a bit.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, and until that wedding that they have for Vale and Lilith, we don't start seeing more of that action and that battle and like
What a
the lines
gnarly
being drawn.
scene.
Yes, that I mean it all got kind of wild. So I mean I agree. The pacing's not going to be that fast for a lot of the content in this book. And I don't think it was as action driven for the plot. The plot in this one was more emotionally driven because it was like their relationship was in turmoil, the kingdom was in turmoil, and I don't know, the stakes I think were higher, but they were more of a long-term solution.
Yeah,
Right? Like you're not going to get answers to the current problems that they're going through quickly, because if you did, then it wouldn't feel real or authentic.
correct.
So I can see that. I can see how it might have dragged on. And I think that's just sometimes going to be a different style of writing or a different way that you consume story.
And I think that style writing is totally acceptable, especially when you develop characters as dense and rich as Carissa Broadbent develops, because she
Hmm.
really does such a great job with her characters. So you become so invested in their stories and in their, well-being essentially, or whatever it is that they're involved in. So I think for me it worked. I really enjoyed it. And then of course the ending was fabulous.
Yeah, so and that was the other thing with the pacing too. It was interesting because as soon as they kind of reconciled and were like, okay, he offered her freedom and was like, I'm not asking you to be my wife. Like he kind of makes it seem like it's a deal, but then we find out that he's already like set it all up for her to like go start a new life, have your freedom. You don't need to do this. And it's similarly in reflection what he offered Nessamine when he was like rebelled against their Rishon king at the time, and she denied him. She was like, "You can't do that. We're not doing that. Like, I'm not going with you." And it was like a heartache.
Yeah.
And this time he kind of offers Araya the same type of like freedom freedom. And she says, I'm not going anywhere. A, this is my kingdom too. And B, we're going to do this together. Like, you don't have to do this alone. And I think showed how much that means, you know, to compare the relationships and realize that what he had with her was probably not the kind of love that he actually craved or deserved. And I thought that was really like full circle for him to be like, wow, love is terrifying and this is why, right? Like,
Yeah.
because they're so scared to love each other and to lose each other. And once that turning point happened, obviously the rest of the book changed. But then we realized like there's the whole god blood to contend with. There's, you know, the troops to rally, and, you know, Septimus turns on them and Simon turned on them and turned on, like, they all of a sudden have many more loose ends to kind of tie up. It wasn't just a clean like, let's just roll together and everything's great, we're gonna be fine. And so, like, you know, you get to the cave and you have Vale and Jessamine like doing battle plans together, and which I thought was so cool because, you know, obviously they used to do those against each other and essentially. So yeah, I think it did kind of drag on a bit with some of that, because then we also meet her mother's sister, and we
Oh,
have like
right.
yeah, there was all these extra things that I was, because I, you know, I had listened to this, I don't know, in the beginning of this year or maybe early, like end of last year. It was the first time I read it, and I just finished basically a reread of this, and I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot that it just, there is all these extra elements to it, and we find out so much about like her mom
Yeah.
and, you know, her being a seer, the whole which you
We
think
learn
about it,
about their whole relationship, which we
yeah, I was so curious about that. Like, how did he end up with this, like, essentially a human
human.
woman? Yeah. So there was so much that I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder it's like, feels like the book is so long, because there really was a lot that was kind of put into it. But every single aspect of it develops the story. And just to me, I really love that element of it. So, I mean, I loved the series. I love their story. I'm so glad that we get to kind of see them in a way continue in the next like duologies, or, you know, like
I
the
feel like
world of
we don't hear
Nyaxia.
about them we don't hear about them really in the next book, right? In Songbird, at least from my recollection.
So I haven't read Songbird.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you don't hear about them.
So yeah,
There's like
but I figured, yeah, like
there's mentions like Marissa
I
mentions like Rain, like, oh, like, missing him or something along those
right.
lines. She mentions Rain at some point in the book, but we don't really learn about what's going on with them or
Like, I'm curious almost, and this might come up more for the Bloodborne because of their involvement
I think so.
with this,
Yeah.
but I think it will be really interesting to see like if it's like in the future of like how their rule is going
Yeah.
essentially, and
Same.
like if the Bloodborne are trying to like take over in some way. And I also, I mean, I'm just excited to even know more about the Shadowborn, because we didn't know Misha was Shadowborn. She
Right.
never said who her like maker was the person that turned her. And then we turns out we meet the prince of the Shadowborn, and she was like, all a switch just went off, and
She
she
was like
went
a rabid
murderous on his ass,
like
which I was looking back and I was thinking, I don't even think he got a name in this book. It just kept going, Shadowborn Prince, because I was like, what is that guy's name? Couldn't find it. So I don't think he even got a name, and I was kind of like, yeah, you know what?
you don't deserve one.
Screw you. You don't get a name.
Yeah, totally.
I'm excited for Misha's story to continue, because I
Same.
think
And
she's
like
just
maybe
an
we'll learn
interesting
more
character.
about too the other what's going on with the other houses as, in the second book, in this or second
Hmm.
part of the
And they all have different magic abilities based on their gods and stuff too. So there's a little more to explore there. The gods themselves could have their own series of books, because there's so much to learn about them.
like even Nyaxia and her story alone, like I think would be so interesting.
Yeah, and then, you know, we know Misha was a priestess of Atraxis, and so she's kind of got that fire magic, but I think he's also kind of an enemy of Nyaxia, and
Yes.
they just have they have all sorts of their
It's
own drama.
wild.
Yeah, so I think all of Ovatrace is just a very interesting dynamic. And again, that just like blows my mind that all of this lived in Carissa's head, and the way that she's like developed it.
Definitely my favorite vampire books, I would say. What would you rate this read? Let's just rate this duology, not the entire series, but just this duology on your 1 to 10.
I am the worst at rating books, because I like have different rating standards for every series. Like, you can't be like overall. It's like, but this type of book and this
Okay.
type of story
So
story.
give
I would definitely go, I would say probably 8. Like I enjoyed it. I had fun. I just felt like there were so many aspects of this that were well written. And yeah, like I said, I want to keep reading more.
Same. I think I'm like, I'm up there too. I think 8 is pretty accurate for me. I think all of her, I don't know, for the War of Lost Heart series, maybe an 8.5 or
Mhm.
9.
Yeah, there's some characters in that you will just never forget. Like I felt
Aetha,
like that. Like
Aetha.
yeah, yes. She could do just the emotional havoc that she can, I don't know, get from us
And
is
it's different. It's different. It hits totally different because she does, we were
yeah.
saying, she makes it so relatable in a way that like really puts you in that world. I think, and this is not talk trash, even though it's going to sound like I'm talking trash, but like, some of the other fantasy books that we've read, we have characters that are fun, but they make decisions that don't really make sense or don't really align with like what they're, you have these badass female characters making very petulant, childish decisions where you're
Yes,
like,
and I know that's a very pet peeve of yours is the character and relating to that character and understand. And I think I don't know about you, but I struggle sometimes with like the younger characters, and I don't know if it's just because I'm obviously not that age anymore, but like it can get really difficult to understand that or understand their motivations or sometimes you just want to like shake some sense into somebody and then that takes you out of the book.
right. And I think sometimes, I've heard the argument, like, I'm not even going to name the book specifically, but, I've heard the art because there's a number of them that do this with their characters, but, they're like, oh, well, she's 19. So, or she's, whatever, like it makes sense that she would be so worked up over this seemingly benign situation or so headstrong, or this is why she's flirting in the worst way possible that actually like makes
Or almost ignorant sometimes, right? Like they're
incredibly
not
ignorant,
considering. Yeah.
not considering things, not making, but I'm like, yeah, sure. But if you put this 19-year-old in very, very serious, real life type situations where they're facing death over and over again, like you mature from those experiences. And to
Yes.
act like you're some kid who's like having a crush for the first time and like, and like who's like never experienced hardship before and basically making like spoiled brat type decisions doesn't make sense.
Yes. And I think sometimes when you have that, you just also have to show the growth from learning from your
Yes.
mistakes and not perpetually going with the
Like,
same
that's such a good
decisions.
point,
Like,
Krista. I love that point because you're right. You're like, okay, so maybe the character makes this kind of dumb, silly mistake once or twice even, but then it's like over and over again, and then you're hitting the same plot over and over and over again, and you're just like, but how could she be so dumb but also be like,
we can't be friends. We cannot be friends with this main character. I don't want you on my side. I don't want to fight with you. I don't
no?
trust your instinct.
Like you could still make a steamy scene or you could still create tension between characters without sacrificing this character's integrity. Like it just doesn't make sense. Anyway,
Yeah.
Carissa Broadbent doesn't ever do that. And that's why I think she's always going to be so highly rated for me.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, her characters are just chef's kiss.
Well, we see how caged Araya was. We see that she was essentially brainwashed into thinking like she was this weak human with fragile skin and fragile bones and like, he kind of convinced her that the only way she had of succeeding in that world was to do the Coriolis bond. And I essentially really love two full circle moments in this book. One, the first book when they went to that tavern, it's like
Oh,
Sandra's,
yes.
but the sign's like missing a letter and
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
just starters or whatever with their shit beer. I love how uncomfortable she was and how Rain, who essentially is a vampire, was like, act human, you're human. I don't understand why you can't do that. Like, because he does it so well.
He held on, even though it had been
Yeah.
so long since he had been a human, more so than she had in a way.
Yeah, she didn't even understand and like had been taught that it was such a like shameful thing that she did everything in her power to not be that. And I thought that it was just such a good visualization of like where she was at in that status of her life. And then the other full circle moment being that they go there and have a beer again in book 2. And this is right as they're starting to kind of see eye to eye and like talk about what, his rule has been like and the goals that they actually want to establish for this kingdom. And she sees it in the streets of the human districts. But she's like, there's not even vampires. I have nobody to kill out here. Like, and so she starts to kind of understand what he was trying to do when he killed Vincent, right? So, and I love that it just so happened to be at the bar. And then at the end, they actually go back and have a drink afterwards as well. The second full circle moment being they ended up having the Coriatis bond to basically join these two clans together. And I thought it was just so cool to see what it actually did for them and what it meant for the two of them and how like wrong it would have been if it was with Vincent, right? Like just I love the way that she ties these things together and like kind of drops something in the middle and then just kind of brings it in a little bit throughout later. And then you just have like this beautiful full circle moment of, oh, here they are having a shit beer with their Koreans, like watching the sun. And it's just beautiful. Like she just does that so well. And I think we see that in very few books sometimes. Sometimes something comes up and then you're like, man, that could have been something, but it doesn't come back or, it's not really explored further. I would love to just be in the mind of Carissa Broadbent, especially as somebody, who writes and would love to be able to do something similar to what she does in her books. So I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, it was pretty magical. And also just to touch on one of the points you made, how wrong it would have been to have that bond with Vincent. And also we don't, even though we learn a little bit about Vincent and that there was some like vulnerability and like love, potentially attachment, but we don't know if he would have, I mean, he lied to her for so long. We don't know how he would have treated that bond, if he would have abused it, continued to abuse her, because he was still abusing her, in many ways.
He just didn't, I feel like he loved her, but he didn't really know how to love. He really only knew how to be power hungry. And I don't know what would have happened if she did stand in his way.
Exactly.
If she did come into terms of, wow, I'm stronger than I thought I was, I'm able to actually put up a fight against him and disagree. If she had discovered these things about him when he was still alive, what would have happened? And how would he have reacted to that? Like,
Exactly.
and I don't know, I don't trust him. Like
I don't
knowing
trust
what
him
he
at
did
all.
to his family.
Yeah. No, exactly. Don't trust him.
Yeah, he was power hungry. And we saw that too with what he was trying to do with like the seers. I still can't get over the teeth that they kept. It's so, like disturbing.
What a weird world.
I want to say maybe we wrap this up with like how we're switching our genres a little bit.
Oh,
I think
I think that's a
our interests in books are varied. I think we're both mostly sci-fi and fantasy readers at this moment anyway, at this point in our lives. Maybe not always, but I definitely love sharing that with this community, but I like being able to expand a bit. And we've primarily read fantasy, so we're going to go into a little bit of sci-fi.
We are going to go into a little bit of sci-fi. So we're going to read Red Rising next. And we only plan to read the first book. I'm sure that many of you are going to decide to continue on reading that series as I have. And Krista, have you read that series as well, or?
I have read books 1 and 2.
Okay.
So technically I'm on 3, but I'm putting that off until we kind of dive back into Red Rising. And I'm also trying to get like my husband on board. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm excited that this is a male main character.
Same.
We've just kind of had the female main characters. Also, the spice level is like less. Yeah. I mean,
It's
which
been a
is,
while
there
since
is
I've read
romance.
this
I'm not
book.
going to say there's no romance, but
Yeah, it's been a while since I read this book, but I don't even remember there being really any spice. There's romance, but there's no spice.
no. Yeah, I think that's a little bit of a difference for some of the books that we've read too.
Yeah,
You and I are like, can take it or leave it when it comes to like spicy scenes. I know that's not the case for everybody,
right.
but that doesn't
Respect, we
mean
respect
there's not a good story.
No, the story is fantastic, and I think everyone's going to enjoy this. This is certainly the kind of book that you can rope your husband into reading with you. I'm still attempting to rope my husband into reading it with me. He's like, I've got too many podcasts to listen to, but we're gonna make I'm gonna make this happen. If there's one thing I can
Yes.
do, I'm gonna make this happen because I think he's gonna really
Well, and I know we have a lot of like our male baddies that are excited to have like more of a male
yeah,
protagonist as well.
yeah.
And I would love to have to make this almost like a couple's like your partner, whoever it may be.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, like join in and do something together. Like I love that and I love knowing like people's opinions on stuff, especially like having something to discuss with them and then obviously share it with us just so we can see what everyone's thoughts are because I love dissecting the story, and I love getting different people's perspectives on
S-
things as well, like
Yeah.
what you agree with, what you don't like, what you like.
Yes, totally. All right, cool. Well, thank you for listening in, baddies. We are going to be starting Red Rising, so get your books ready
And we'll be back to discuss that one next month.
next month. See you then.